In this video, we're going over some of the best spells that have the option to deal radiant damage of some kind. One of the better types of damage to deal since it's very rarely resisted or immune, and even helps turn off regeneration for certain creatures. Starting us off at number 10, we have Guiding Bolt. This is a first level spell that shoots a bolt of light at an enemy within 120 feet, dealing 46 radiant damage on hit using your ranged spell attack. When this hits, the next attack roll made against the creature before the end of your next turn has advantage. This is a staple spell for clerics that holds a lot of value in a fight. The reason for this is because, alongside its hefty 46 damage, it also provides one of the few ways to give advantage on their next attack rolls at early levels, which is a huge boon. While this spell is only available on the cleric spell list, other subclasses can take this spell as well, such as Celestial Warlocks, Divine Soul Sorcerers, Glory Paladins, and Star Druids. While this spell doesn't deal the most damage on this list, it is a cheap spell you can grab as early as your character creation, and while it becomes entirely useless at high levels, when cantrips are doing as much damage if not more, at early levels, it's still an excellent option for clerics who can change their spells every time they rest. It is not as good if you can't unlearn it later on. Still, due to its damage being pretty good for first level spell, and the advantage helping a lot at lower levels, this does make the list, if only at the bottom of it. And at number 9, we have Moonbeam. This is a second level concentration spell that creates a cylinder within 120 feet of you, which damages enemies that first pass through it or start their turn inside of it. The creature takes 2d10 radiant damage if they fail a constitution saving throw, or half as much if they succeed. Creatures that are shape changers, such as doppelgangers and werewolves, have disadvantage on the saving throw, and will revert to their original form, unable to assume a different form until it leaves the light. The beam sheds dim light, has a 5-foot radius, stretches up to 40 feet high, and can be moved up to 60 feet on each of your turns using your action. Now, all of this sounds pretty good on paper. For the cost of a second level spell in your concentration, you deal radiant damage, which is an extremely rare damage type, especially for druids, who are the main class who can cast this spell. The disadvantage on the save for shape changers makes this a fantastic spell when dealing with something like a vampire, as they have a regeneration ability that shuts down when they take radiant damage, as they are also shape changers. But even with all of these benefits, there are quite a few downsides when using the spell. This spell targets a creature's constitution with the saving throw, which is the worst stat to target in the game since most creatures have very high constitution modifiers. So there's a very good chance you won't be doing full damage as often as other spells such as Flaming Sphere and Spike Growth. Two second level concentration spells that are also available to druids, which do a much better job as control spells despite technically doing less damage than Moonbeam. You see, the reason why Moonbeam has more damage than the other two second level spells is to facilitate the fact that it uses your action in order to move it around rather than your bonus action, like with Flaming Sphere. This is pretty detrimental because it means that if a creature decides to walk out of the Moonbeam, you can't really do anything if you're planning on moving the beam around to chase the creature. Also, shape changers are a fairly rare enemy type to encounter, although this is a bit campaign dependent. In most campaigns, you won't be encountering them too often. So while this is a very iconic spell with a lot of seemingly decent effects on paper, the fact that there are plenty of better spells at the same level that might be preferable to it is the reason why it only takes number 9 spot on this list. And coming in at number 8, we have Spirit Shroud. This is a third level concentration spell from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that uses your bonus action to cast and has a range of self. What this spell does is it allows you to choose between Radiant, Necrotic, or Cold as its damage type when you first cast it. Then, whenever you hit a creature within 10 feet of you with an attack, you deal an extra 1d8 of whatever damage type you chose before, and prevents creatures from receiving any form of healing until the start of your next turn. Additionally, creatures of your choice that start their turn within 10 feet of you have their speed reduced by 10 feet until the start of your next turn. This spell can be used to squeeze out a little bit of extra damage whenever you need to, as well as force enemies to either play around this spell or move away, potentially provoking opportunity attacks from you. Clerics and paladins can make great use of this spell because it's only a bonus action to cast and also prevents creatures from healing or escaping as easily. Pact of the Blade Warlocks and Bladesinger Wizards, along with Arcane Trickster Rogues and Eldritch Knight Fighters, also make good use of this spell for much of the same reasons. Being able to choose your damage type with this spell when you cast it is also a plus because it helps you bypass certain resistances by simply choosing a damage type that your target doesn't resist, as you will be hard pressed to find a creature that resists all three. And because this spell deals 1d8 extra damage whenever you hit, this combos extremely well with spells like Eldritch Blast, Scorching Ray, or Extra Attack, which all require separate attack rolls in order for each bolt, ray, or weapon attack to hit, resulting in a huge boost of extra damage. As a warlock, if you manage to get your hands on some Illusionist Bracers, a very rare magic item that allows you to use your bonus action in order to cast the cantrip you've already used the second time that turn, you can just melt enemies when you're buffed with this spell. Unfortunately, the biggest downfall of the spell, and what ultimately prevents it from being higher on this list, is its range. Only having a range of 10 feet means this spell is only really useful for characters that want to be up close and personal, like paladins. Not only that, but many of the classes that have access to this spell also have access to much better spells at the same level or lower. Clerics have Spirit Guardians, Paladins have Bless, Wizards have Slow, Fear, and Hypnotic Pattern, and Warlocks have Hex, which is only single target and only deals 1d6 extra necrotic damage per hit, but is a first level spell with a much longer range. Preventing creatures from healing doesn't come up that often, and when it does, there's usually much better ways for dealing with it. Although shaving 10 feet off of a creature's movement speed is almost worth it, considering that if you also have ways to knock the creature prone, it would be almost impossible for them to escape, since they'd have to use half their movement speed already just to get back up, leaving them with only 10 feet of movement by the time they stand back up. Despite that, however, the range limitation still really knocks the spell down the list, only allowing it to make it to the number 8 spot. And at number 7, we have Flame Strike, a 5th level spell with a range of 60 feet that rains a column of divine flames in a 10-foot radius, 40-foot high cylinder, which deals 46 fire damage and 46 radiant damage to each creature caught inside, or half as much damage with a successful saving throw. This spell deals as much damage as a 3rd level spell Fireball, but deals half of that damage as radiant damage, which is resisted a lot less often than fire is, making Flame Strike a pretty solid option when dealing with multiple foes. It's also worth noting that it has a height of 40 feet, making it a good contender for dealing with groups of flying enemies as well. All in all, this is a really good option for a cleric to take if they want to be able to dish out some big area effect damage that they otherwise might not be able to. The only real downside of the spell are the fact that its radius is smaller than other spells of its level, and the fact that half of its damage is still fire damage, which a lot of creatures resist or just flat out immune to, meaning there might be some times where you won't be able to use this damage to its full potential. And despite only being available through the cleric spell list, a lot of other subclasses can also learn the spell, though some of those same subclasses can also take Fireball, which deals the same amount of damage and uses a lower level spell slot. So if you're not worried about the increased radius and know that you're fighting enemies that don't resist fire damage, why not just cast that instead of Flame Strike? The reason this spell isn't higher on this list is because despite it being a solid option for clerics to have, there are plenty of other better options which are even better for dealing radiant damage. And at number 6, we have Sunbeam. This is a 6th level concentration spell which allows you to shoot light beams out of your hand in a 5-foot wide, 60-foot long line as an action for 1 minute. Creatures hit by this take 68 radiant damage and are blinded until the start of your next turn, unless they make a constitution saving throw, in which case they take half damage and are not blinded, although undead and oozes roll this save with disadvantage. Also, while you concentrate on the spell, your hands radiate sunlight and shed bright light in a 30-foot radius, and dim light for an additional 30-foot pass. Straight away, this spell has the same problems as Moonbeam, where you have to use your action on subsequent turns in order to get the full effect of the spell. This spell also requires a constitution save, which, mentioned earlier, is the worst stat to target in the game. However, unlike Moonbeam, you don't need to wait for a creature to start their turn or enter the area. You just point and shoot the spell and deal 68 radiant damage every turn and a chance to blind. And since druids can learn this spell, there's nothing stopping a moon druid from casting Sunbeam and then using their bonus action in order to wild shape into a flying creature that shoots beams of sunlight at your enemies, since wild shape doesn't force you to drop concentration on spells. But what really makes Sunbeam stand out over Moonbeam is the fact that Sunbeam is also available to wizards and sorcerers. While not as important for wizards, sorcerers have access to the quicken spell metamagic option, which allows them to cast a spell that requires an action to cast as a bonus action instead. Because of the rules for spell casting, you can't cast a spell as your bonus action and then cast another spell with your normal action, unless with the exception of casting a cantrip, so you can't quicken spell 2 fireballs this way. However, when it comes to spells that use your concentration and allows you to maintain the spell afterwards, such as Moonbeam or Sunbeam, the only part that counts as casting the spell is the initial casting of it. So what you can do as a sorcerer is cast Sunbeam on your first turn, then on your subsequent turns you can use the effect of Sunbeam again, while also casting Fireball as a bonus action using Quicken Spell in order to bombard the battlefield with high damage. Just be mindful of the angle in which you use your Sunbeam, since it only shoots in a straight line. So while there are still the obvious downsides of targeting Constitution, and the fact that blind isn't the best condition to inflict at higher levels, the damage is really solid and there are some fun ways to combo it, so it takes number 6 spot on this list. Coming in at number 5, we have Destructive Wave. This is a 5th level spell that creates a burst of energy within a 30-foot radius, striking creatures you choose inside that radius and dealing 5d6 thunder damage and 5d6 radiant or necrotic damage, while also knocking them prone. This is one of the capstone spells for paladins when they reach level 17. However, Tempest clerics also learn this spell, though at a much lower level, and for them specifically, it's far more effective thanks to their Channel Divinity Destructive Wrath class feature, allowing them to deal maximum thunder damage with this spell instead of rolling for it. Destructive Wave also gives paladins a way to deal a good amount of AoE damage, which they typically struggle with. There's also the benefit of allowing you to choose your targets, meaning there's no risk of accidentally damaging your party members. The chance to knock creatures prone is a huge plus, as it allows your melee-based party member to swing at them with advantage. What makes this spell stand out over the previous spots on this list is the fact that, as a paladin, you're not losing anything by casting the spell. For the most part, you're already in the front lines taking damage and drawing enemy attention away from your allies, which makes this spell work great for its range. On top of that, it deals 10d6 damage, which is already a lot for paladins, and even half of that damage is already more than anything else they can do, even at 17th level. And while you're probably not going to be using this spell to try and knock enemies prone, it certainly is a nice benefit to have alongside the damage, making this an excellent spell that's worth its spell slot. And at number 4, we have Holy Weapon. This is a 5th level concentration spell from Xanatar's Guide to Everything that uses your bonus action to touch a weapon which imbues it with holy power, causing it to emit bright light in a 30-foot radius and deal an additional 2d8 radiant damage on hit for up to 1 hour. Alternatively, you can use your bonus action on a turn after you cast the spell in order to dismiss the spell, causing a burst of radiance to engulf creatures of your choosing within 30 feet of the weapon, dealing 4d8 radiant damage and blinding them for 1 minute unless they succeed a Constitution saving throw, in which case they take half damage and are not blinded. And additionally, creatures blinded this way can make another Constitution saving throw at the end of each of their turns in order to end the effect. This is another one of the capstone spells for paladins, but it's also learned by clerics and divine soul sorcerers, making it a little more flexible than Destructive Wave. Clerics might use this in order to help conserve spell slots while still dealing respectable damage. However, clerics have plenty of other spells that will, more often than not, be much more useful, such as Bless, Spirit Guardians, or even a spell they might have learned from their other subclasses, like Polymorph for Trickery Clerics. Divine Soul Sorcerers, however, might find a different use for this spell. You see, this spell has a range of touch and doesn't specify that you have to cast it on your weapon. So if you wanted your fighter to deal an extra 2d8 radiant damage with every swing of their greatsword, you absolutely could. And since fighters gain extra attacks as they level, this is an excellent damage boost all the way up to max level. The best analogy to use for paladins is that this is a spell. For the cost of your 5th level spell slot, it gives you as many 1st level smites as you want for 1 hour. And of course, you can still use your smites in addition to this to boost your damage even further. Then if you find yourself surrounded, you can use your bonus action to end the spell, dealing that 48 AoE damage and potentially blinding your attackers, allowing you to escape. So just like Destructive Wave, you're not really going to be using this spell for its blind effect or the 48 AoE damage. Instead, this spell will most often be used in order to directly enhance the attacks that you would have already been doing, which is why Holy Weapon places higher this list than Destructive Wave. And at number 3, we have Crown of Stars. This is a 7th level spell that requires an action to cast, and what it does is it creates 7 star-like motes that orbit you for 1 hour. These motes can be sent catering towards a creature or object within 120 feet of you using your bonus action, dealing 4d12 radiant damage to whatever they hit. But do note that you can only send 1 mote a turn, so this isn't a big nuke spell. Also, whether you hit or miss, the mote is expended. As long as you have 4 or more motes remaining, they shed bright light in a 30-foot radius around you, dim light for an additional 30 feet. At 3 or less motes remaining, they only shed dim light for a 30-foot radius. There are a lot of really amazing 7th level spells in the game, and Crown of Stars is no exception. What makes this spell so great is the fact that it doesn't require concentration. Once you cast it, the motes stick around for the entire hour duration, or until you use the last one. And because it uses your bonus action to send them flying towards something, you can actually cast the spell and hit a target with it on the same turn. Then after that, you can freely cast other spells, like Cone of Cold or Fireball, while still leaving your bonus action free to make another attack for another 4d12 radiant damage. If you manage to hit with all 7 motes, that's 182 damage on average, which is pretty solid even at higher levels. This spell acts very similarly to Spiritual Weapon, in that you can cast it, then proceed to use it as your bonus action to attack something, which is really great when you're a class that doesn't really get much use out of your bonus action traditionally. The only real downside of the spells is that it requires a 7th level spell slot, which you don't have very many of, and there are so many other fantastic 7th level spells that it might be hard to justify taking it. Things like Simulacrum, Force Cage, or any of the other spells in my top 10 7th level spells video, which you should check out after watching this one. But by itself, this is still a fantastic spell and gives you an excellent return on investment. And at number 2, we have Sickening Radiance. This is a 4th level spell that requires concentration and lasts up to 10 minutes, and it creates a 30-foot radius sphere centered on a point you choose within 120 feet of you. Creatures that move into the air for the first time on a turn or start their turn inside of it will suffer 4d10 radiant damage and accumulate 1 level of exhaustion unless they succeed a saving throw to avoid any effects of the spell. Straight away, this spell deals a decent amount of radiant damage for a 4th level spell. However, because it relies on a Constitution saving throw, you might have a hard time actually dealing that damage, as there's no half damage with the spell. If the creature makes a save, they're unaffected. This is done as a balance measure because of how detrimental the exhaustion condition is. There are 6 levels of exhaustion, and each level past the first is crippling in combat. At level 1, the target is disadvantaged on their ability checks. This doesn't come up too often in combat, but things like grapples and counter spells do require ability checks. At 2 levels of exhaustion, a target's speed is halved. This one alone allows you to infinitely kite a creature unless they have a ranged attack option. 3 levels of exhaustion means that the creature now has disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws, which, if they are still inside the spell, means that it will start to snowball. 4 levels of exhaustion halves the creature's hit points and makes them much easier to kill. 5 levels of exhaustion reduces the creature's speed to 0, making them a sitting duck. And finally, at 6 levels of exhaustion, you just die. This is really not a condition you want to be suffering from, but a fantastic condition to afflict upon your enemies. And this spell is the only way to do it reliably. The best way to use this is in conjunction with other spells to stop a target from moving. The most well-known combo is using this with Force Cage. You do have to cast this first, as Force Cage blocks all spells from entering or leaving, but there is another combo that you can use much earlier as long as you have 1 to 2 party members who can cast Wall of Force. You cast Sickening Radiance, then your friend casts Wall of Force as a dome, forcing your enemy to sit in the area for the full 10 minutes unless they have a way to teleport out of the dome, have a burrow speed, or have a way to break through the Wall of Force, which most enemies will not. Now, if you have 2 friends who can cast Wall of Force, you can up the ante and capture flying enemies inside 2 domed Walls of Force. This allows you to capture larger targets and could let you even kill an adult dragon as early as level 9. Now, adult dragons do have between a +10 and a +13 to their constitution saves depending on which color they are, so make sure you actually have the spell save DC to pull this off. But 10 minutes is 100 saves, so even if the chance is low, they just need to fail 9 of them. There is also a much less well-known part about the spell, and that is the light that the spell creates makes it impossible for creatures to benefit from being invisible. So if you can keep an invisible target within 5 feet of the spell area, they are not invisible anymore. The reason this spell only makes it to the number 2 spot on this list is because despite being the only spell that causes exhaustion to enemies, it does require teamwork to reach its maximum potential. But when it does, it can really break encounters. And at number 1, we have Spirit Guardians. This is a 3rd level concentration spell that lasts up to 10 minutes and has a range of self and calls forth spirits to damage creatures within 15 feet of you. Creatures that enter for the first time on a turn or start their turn there must succeed a wisdom saving throw in order to take only half of the 3d8 radiant or necrotic damage, depending on your alignment. Also, the creature's speed is cut in half while inside the area of the spell. This is an incredible spell that is relatively cheap to cast, as it only requires a 3rd level spell slot, and keeps your party protected by slowly killing enemies inside of it, while also preventing enemies from escaping very easily since any creatures inside of it has their speed halved. This fits a cleric perfectly, as they are a blend of melee and caster, as many of their subclasses get proficiency in heavy armor. This spell is fantastic at controlling the battlefield while also dealing pretty competitive damage as well. While keeping concentration up while in melee can be difficult, wearing heavy armor makes that less of an issue. At only 3rd level, this is a relatively low investment and a spell that as a cleric you should almost always have prepared. If you have a turn to set up before combat begins, you can combine this with Spiritual Weapon to deal damage with your action, bonus action, and passively with this, allowing you to become a Wrecking Ball. If you want a great low-level control spell that deals decent damage on top of that, this is an excellent pick. I talked about it more in my top 10 3rd level spells video, but while there are a few downsides to it, it's a spell that most, if not all, clerics are prioritizing, and rightly so. Alright, and that's the list. Do you agree with this list or have any ideas for future videos just like this one? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments below.